saying hi to Councilman Vaca.
So I'm Rima. I'm a reporter for Chalky, New York. I've been there for almost a year now, and I cover New York City schools. I have some focus on state policy, which is why this is especially exciting for me. Today we have Senator John Liu, who is the chair of the Senate's New York City Education Committee, which is a standing committee now. Assemblyman Michael Benedetto. And I should say Senator Liu comes from Queens. Assemblyman Benedetto comes from the Bronx. And he chairs the Assembly's Education Committee. Last but certainly not least, we have Zoe Markman. She's a rising senior at the High School for American Studies, which is a specialized high school. She's also an intern on a podcast called the Miseducation Podcast, which focuses on inequities in the New York City school system. So, as we all know, standardized testing affects and stresses out the lives of teachers, parents, students, but is also a way to assess progress in academic performance. So I'm going to try to hit several topics, and then hopefully if we have time at the end, I'd love to take questions from the audience on this. So we're going to start with the specialized high schools debate. Just a little background here. We're just going to get right into it. So a little background. Last year, Mayor de Blasio proposed scrapping the admissions exam to the specialized high schools, which are considered by some, by many, the sort of crown jewel high schools in New York City. And the reason that this was proposed was because a majority, at least this year, 51% of offers to these schools went to Asian American students, 28% went to white students, and about 11% of offers went to Black and Hispanic students, while Black and Hispanic students actually make up roughly 70% of students citywide. So the city's approach to diversify these schools was, how about we get rid of the exam? And while there was support for this, there was also substantial pushback. With one of the arguments that this deliberately excludes Asian American families and students. So there's been a lot of debate, a lot of pushback. You've probably seen this in the news a lot, including from our publication. So I want to, and this is something that in part has to be dealt with on the state level, since it's actually, the exam is enshrined into state law. So I want to sort of pull back a little bit on this whole debate and just start with an open question. And I think what we can do is just go one by one here. Whoever wants to jump in. Should we be screening students at all to admit them to high school? And what is the benefit and the drawbacks of screening students? And should we have any screening schools or specialized high schools at all? And then I have a specific question for student related, but we can get to that once we get through this question first. So, Senator Liu, please.
Well, thank you, Rima, for setting the stage for what I think is going to be an enjoyable discussion. I want to thank City and State for putting this panel on, as well as the rest of today. It's an important conference on pretty much the most important issue that city and state government deal with, education. #1 item on our budgets, right? Right, I see some of my class right there. Budgets are priorities, and public schools taking up, almost a third of the city budget, almost a quarter of the state budget. It's our most important priority, so no wonder that City and State has an important publication, and the fourth estate, including Chalky, are putting this discussion on. I think Rima, this panel is about standardized testing, and of course we're going to jump right to the admissions process for the New York City specialized high schools. Note that these schools are called specialized high schools, not elite high schools or cream of the crop high schools. I think somewhere along the line things got a little things morphed. The public mindset morphed in terms of what these schools really are. These really are, and as Yatin Chu, one of our parent advocates, will always say to you, you know, these schools, specifically the three schools, Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant, and Bronx Science, they're actually specialized high schools. Specialized in what? They're specialized math and science high schools. And so the exam does have a heavy tilt towards math and science and technical, analytical criteria. So that's something to consider. But I like the way Rima phrased the question, which was, you know, well, should we have any screen schools? And I have sat through hours and hours and hours of people providing their opinions on this issue, both in public formats as well as in numerous meetings with stakeholders and people who have an opinion or suggestion or complaint about the specialized high school admissions process. And I think one of the things really is, you know, there are some people who want to change or change what's called the SHSAT, which is the admissions exam for specialized high schools, or get rid of it altogether. And many of the people who would like to do that are not necessarily against the admissions process for specialized high schools per se, but they are generally against screen schools. The idea that we should have even programs or schools called gifted and talented, that all schools should be created equal, and that all children, all of our school kids from everywhere in the city should have the same access to high quality education without tagging one school as being elite or cream of the crop or specialized in this or that. Every school should be the same. That's one thing that we've done. The other criticism of the specialized high school admissions process, something that I hear over and over again, is that well, should there be an exam in the first place? And many of these advocates are people who don't think there should be standardized exams, or certainly standardized exams where the result is very concentrated, i.e. highly leveraged standardized exams. So these are two things that I think it would be helpful for me personally if I was able to get some idea or opinions from your suggestions about how to deal with these two issues. Number one, whether there actually should be screen schools. And the other issue being, well, how much should there be standardized exams? How much should we rely on standardized exams? So I look forward to this discussion. Thank you, Rima.
To follow up, Senator Blasio, do you have an idea? I know you've had many public forums on the specialized high schools, but I've heard these other ideas. What are your thoughts on and ideas about whether there should be screen schools or not, or what the value is for screen schools?
Well, I just said that it would be valuable to me personally as we put together this policy, whether we change anything or not. Of course, it's going to be continue to be deliberated in the Senate, and we have the chairman of the Assembly Education Committee right here. Earlier, you heard from Shelley Mayer, my education chair in the state Senate. I don't know if she's still here, but she's very much engaged in this as well. So, Rima, you've been asking me this question ever since I was elected last December. What are you going to do about the specialized high school admissions process? And I am shocked that you would ask me again right now. And I know, look, I'm not trying to be coy. I do not know the answer to it. I don't claim to know the answer yet, but I'm so open-minded. My eyes and ears are all open to suggestions.
Assemblyman Benedetto?
Rima, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, and hopefully everybody hears me so I don't have to lean forward to this mic. Lots of different issues here. The question you asked, should we have specialized high schools? Well, yeah, I think we do. You want to concentrate a school where you can move those exceptional children or show abilities as far ahead as they can. And the graduates of Brooklyn Tech and Bronx High School of Science and the other specialized schools have made themselves known throughout the country, throughout the world. When you say I'm a graduate of, and the next word come out is in Bronx High School of Science, it means something. If you're in California, they know this. It means something if you're in Germany or Paris or wherever you might be. People know those schools. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's a tribute to New York City. It's an obligation to the school system to take their finest and advance them as far as they can. Can it be done on every single school so everybody has? I don't know if that's realistic. And so you do put them in specialized schools. But once you say you're going to do specialized schools, well, now comes the next problem of, well, how do we select those who belong inside those schools? And that's the wonderful problem that we've been dealing with over the last couple years here, focusing in on the selection process. I don't know if we want to go that far just yet in this discussion. Okay, and we've certainly discussed it up in Albany. It was prompted by Mayor de Blasio's suggestion a year and a half ago that we change the process. Responding to that, Assemblyman Barron proposed a bill which essentially said what the mayor was thinking about. That's a bill that came out of committee a year ago and didn't really advance beyond that. It's been discussed all year. It's been conferenced by, to much debate in the Assembly Democratic Conference about which way we should go. We had hearings on this, a fine day, 10-hour testimony that I sat through, and it was fascinating. I don't know if we're going to get to a resolution on this in the near future. There are so many divergent. Will doing away with the test automatically make these schools diverse? I don't know. I don't know if it will. Will doing away with the test maintain the high quality of the students that we've expected that came out of these schools? Will, is that the best solution? Should we keep the test and maybe go to some sort of hybrid type of evaluation process? How valid is standardized tests in general? What do they measure? And should that be the only determinant? There are so many questions in this. And what has the city been doing to expand the opportunities for students to get into the test? We know of so many students who take these tests that have been preparing for years because at home they've been forced to, after school on weekends, take test prep, and the pressure that's been put into them, and the great expense it is for the families. Is that right? And should maybe we do test prep in all the schools in the New York City system? These are all questions that have been hotly discussed and viewed, and these are good questions. And one last thing before I pass it on: should the state be involved at all in this situation? What other city in the state of New York relies on legislation from Albany to determine who goes to the high schools? Well, there are none. It's just in this one instance that we have mandated from Albany in a law that was passed in 1971. You guys do the math on that. That sounds pretty close to 50 years, I think. Okay, thank you. Why are we passing laws on this? And should we have this law in the first place? And maybe the best answer is do away with the law and just leave it to the city and the professionals in the Board of Education. All considerations would throw out. These are all considerations we we are looking at in the Assembly as we discuss this whole idea. I told people out there, by the way, to do some applause after I finish. So thank you for the prompt.
Okay, Zoe, same question to you, but an additional question. I want to know what you think about what the role of students and student voices in this. It's something we've heard, as in, my news organization has heard about it. A lot of people have heard about where's the student voice, not with just the specialized high schools, but other grade schools in the massive New York City system. So.
Well, thank you. And to anyone wondering why I'm here on this panel today, I'm a student at a specialized high school, and I'm an intern for the Miseducation podcast, the student-led podcast reporting on segregation in New York City. That said, I'm not speaking for any organization. I'm speaking for myself today. So on the question of screened schools, I think when we look at screened schools, you have to be very careful what you're screening for. When I was 4, I took a test to get into a gifted and talented elementary school. I don't think that tested whether I was gifted and talented. It tested whether or not my mom knew to take me to take that test that day. So that doesn't necessarily mean we can't have screened schools at all, but it does mean that we have to be very careful what we're screening for. And when the gifted and talented test and screened middle schools and the specialized high schools are better indicators of race than how students actually perform in high school, that's a sign that we're not screening for the right things. And on the question of student voice, I will say that I'm the only student speaker today, I believe, and the fact that an entire education conference only has one student speaker when there are 1.1 million students in New York City. That's not right. That's all I'll say.
Okay, so let's move on to another question here about this. Before we go on, I took a couple notes just to address a couple things. So we've seen research that shows that GPA, so the city's plan is they want to admit the top 7% of middle school students instead to specialized high schools based on multiple academic measures. So still a screen of sorts. There's been research that says GPA can be a better predictor of success, but that good scores on the SHSAT is also a predictor of success going forward. Research has also found that students with similar qualifications who don't go to specialized high schools actually end up getting comparable SATs and college offers, so that's something to chew on as well. Okay, so this is more of a question for Assemblyman Benedetto and Senator Liu. You guys alluded a little bit to this in your answers before, but we know a lot more seemed to happen this session about this issue and what to do about it. There were, Senator Liu held several forums, and Assemblyman Benedetto talked about the hearing. There was talk of the Democratic Conference. A lot sort of went on. But again, the bill didn't move one way or the other. So can you guys sort of, to the extent that you can you pull the curtain back a little bit about the political pressures, things that maybe you were hearing from constituents, things you were hearing from lobbyists, and sort of the pressure that you dealt with while figuring out what to do about this issue in Albany this year?
Listen, it's a difficult question. Number one, the commonality of it all is that I'm sure legislators, both in the Senate and the Assembly from New York City, are very proud of the schools, are very proud of the students who are in them, and the reputations they have, and they want to maintain that reputation. So there's a commonality in that. How best to achieve who goes to those schools, though, in a population of the city of New York, and I don't know the racial breakdown of the city of New York, I really don't, I should know these things, but I'm terrible with numbers. But unfortunately, how come we don't have more African American students in those schools? That is a problem. And somehow we have to look at that and solve that problem and make them more racially balanced. We want that. But anytime you do that, okay, anytime you change the structure of admittance, okay, there are people who might not benefit from the new law. And in New York City, and there's elections, wow, that can translate to whole populations feeling offended and put out, and that's votes. It comes right down to. That's pure and simple, and we got to look at that in our constituents and make sure we're making them happy. Okay, we had a hearing. I mentioned the hearing before. It was 10 hours. As the chairman of the education committee, I had a responsibility to be up there and try to be as fair as possible to everybody coming. Okay, before we even had the hearing and the people were coming in applications, we were trying to make a determination of where these applications are coming from, what's their attitude that's going to be presented, because we didn't want to leave any side of this issue out. We wanted it to be as fair as possible. And the hearing was long, but the hearing was diverse in its opinions on this matter. Some promoting and arguing for continuation of the test, many arguing against it, others coming up with different questions about the validity of specialized tests in general and what do they measure at all, and is that the best determinant? Is it best to have a portfolio assessment? So, it's a political matter. It is also, at the same time, that you try to resolve your political problems in this particular area, you also are trying to weigh the fairness of the issue. Okay, and how do you balance everything? You want to do the right thing. And sometimes in politics, particularly in this great city of New York, it's not that easy to come to a conclusion. But what we're trying to do is just do what's right for the children, what's fair, and somehow survive this politically. That's probably what's in the mind of many, many of the people out there. And I feel a little responsible in one way. The bill that was passed 48 years ago was passed. It's called the Carranza Heck Bill. Heck being the Assembly, and Carranza being the state senator. Carranza was my state senator back then, and as a matter of fact, my entry into politics so many years ago, 40 years ago, was running against John Carranza. So it's almost kind of personal, to me that this guy started the problem, and now we're trying to resolve it. But trying to be honest about the political situation.
Mike, maybe you should have ran against him earlier. Right? Then we wouldn't be at this point. Rima's question about what kinds of, she wants us to peel back on the political process and different kinds of pressures. There's really nothing to peel back. It's pretty evident to anybody who's looking at the situation. Next April, we're going to have the results of these admissions tests once again. And I have no doubt, I wish I was wrong, but I have no doubt that the results next April will be as abysmal and as horrifying and unacceptable as it has been for this past April and last April and a few years before that. And that result will be a tiny number of people passing the test who are African American students. And it's going to be appalling. It is going to, everybody's going to scream foul once again, including myself, including all the people who have been for keeping the SHSAT as well as people who want to abolish it. Because, in listening to so many dozens, if not hundreds of people on this issue, I see a very common denominator. That common denominator is that nobody thinks that the results of the SHSAT are acceptable. Now, the difference is how you analyze it. The mayor and the chancellor would have us believe that, okay, well, look, you have this exam. Either you agree with the results and therefore somehow conclude that African American students are not going to be able to do as well. Or you have to conclude that the test is invalid. It's no good. Well, that's actually a really false choice, because there is another big explanation. The big explanation is that for too long, the school system has just failed communities of color, and that they have not been able to get the same quality of education as people who, for example, might spend their weekends prepping for tests. So that is a big explanation. I think it's plausible. I don't know exactly where the truth is, which is what I'm trying to get at. So if you talk about the political pressure that I feel, that Mike feels, that our colleagues feel in the legislature about coming up with a solution on this, we don't want to do something simply to react to a result that pretty much everybody universally accepts as unacceptable, which is what I think the mayor's proposal presented last April in June of 2018 was. Too much of a fast gut reaction without real understanding of what the potential consequences could be. Sure, they will, by doing that, by taking simply the top 7% of every middle school across the city, you're certainly going to have geographic and probably racial diversity at the beginning. What happens after 5 years? What happens after 10 years? You know, I can tell you already, many families have expressed to me that they're just going to move because they want to get into these schools so badly, in part because the city has perpetuated this misguided notion that these are cream of the crop elite schools. No, they're specialized math and science high schools. So I want to get the truth out there. I want to have some kind of answer, if not change in public policy, to address what has become a perennial, unacceptable, horrific result. But I want to make sure we get it right. And the only way we're going to get it right is by hearing from the experts within the Department of Education, outside the Department of Education, possibly from other cities and other countries as well, to see what has worked in those systems and what has not. But we're not going to solve this problem that has been an issue for decades overnight. So I'd rather take the extra time to do it. Now, people are going to say, well, what about the 7th and 8th graders now? Yeah, unfortunately, we're not going to have a public policy that's going to be immediate and affect and impact the incoming class or the incoming class of test takers. But we do have to get it right, because whatever we implement potentially sticks around for another 48 years. When I was in high school, we debated this issue. Should we have schools based on a single test? Should we consider ourselves, I went to Brown Science. Should we consider ourselves, or be allowed to consider or have others consider our school an elite school? And there were lots of debates. Same kinds of questions, except now, 30 years later, today, maybe 20 years. All right, 30 years. There's now a racial element. Whereas 30 years ago, when I was talking about this same issue with my friends in school, there wasn't so much of a racial issue. There wasn't any race element in the discussion. Today there is. And I think that's what has saddened me the most about what's transpired over the last year and a half. That in the way the city put out its so-called solution to a problem that could have addressed a long time ago, even within this administration, the issue of segregation in our public schools, the failure on their part to do nothing on this issue, and now to throw something out there that the mayor has openly admitted he didn't understand the kind of controversy it would create. I mean, the worst part of this is that not only do we have to deal with this very important educational issue, the issue of not just specialized high school admissions, but really standardized exams, and whether or not there should be screen schools. But now, the mayor and his plan created a huge rift across races. It's been extremely emotional and divisive. It never had to be that way. So I want to make sure that if we are able to, and I have every doubt we can, come up with a solution to address what's going to be coming up this coming April, when those results come out, and possibly next April, that we come up with a solution that not only is sustainable for the future, but also brings communities together. The solution that the mayor and the chancellor have put out there in the form of Barron's bill, that is not sustainable. Even if we were to pass it next year, it would result in years and years of strife. It would collapse on itself. We'd have to do something else within a few years.
Rima, if I can just cut in for a second, okay?
Sure. Quickly, because I want to move on to the Regents Exams, but yes.
Yeah, I just want to take a step back. I was talking before with Zoe. Zoe, you go to the High School of American Studies. Okay, good school. You like it? Yeah, okay. Any deficiencies that in the school, if you had to say, what was what?
It's not diverse.
And that's exactly the point. We are not just keeping out a class of people who should be in higher numbers in the school, but we're also cheating those that are there now, okay, with a diverse education, which is all part of the education setting, and which we have been no good at, and we got to find a solution. And that's all I want to say.
We have a ton of audience questions. I want to try to get through them, but we are running a little bit long on time, so I'm going to go on to the next topic. So you all may have also seen this in the news. The Board of Regents is now reconsidering the Regents Exams, which are synonymous in New York with graduation. I'm from Illinois, so I did not have to take an exit exam, and when I came here, I was like, what are the Regents? And they're extremely rigorous. And now New York is in the minority of states that uses such a rigorous exit exam process. So, you know, how did we get here? How did the drumbeat sort of start to possibly get rid of the Regents exams? And if we were to do that as a state, what is a good way to measure and ensure college and career readiness for students, you know, going forward?
Yeah, let me.
Actually, if we could, I want to start with Zoe on this because she probably has had to go through this. So maybe we'll just go in this order.
All right. Yeah, I'll say I took my last Regents exam in June, and I'm very happy about that. That said, I don't necessarily know that the solution is to completely abolish Regents exams. That said, there should be alternate pathways. Project-based assessments are incredibly rigorous ways of graduating, and writing a 10-page paper tells you more about
educate your kids and what's not. I mean, they have changed. And certainly it goes to assessments also. That changes too in our views on assessment and what's the best possible way. And Zoe has made an excellent point here. Why should it all be assessed on a single examination? The reasons, I remember going through it, passing all those tests. It was something, but did it measure the right thing? Did it measure what your skills that you have bred for? You're a language major. Saying that you can pass the Spanish Regents test, that means you're bilingual. I passed the Spanish Regents test. I don't know a phrase. People say, what do you know in Spanish? And all I say is, voy a la feria mundial, because that's what I was taught in school to write the essay on the test. Because that means, for those who don't know, today I'm going to the World's Fair. And in 1965, it was in New York City. Okay? So what's a better way to measure that? Well, how well do you speak the language you've been taught over these years? And is that done on a test? Maybe it should be a different way of assessing. Okay? There are schools that are in the state of New York, about 38 of them, okay, that use portfolio assessments, and they've done, and it's very rigorous. And the students are held to a very high standard. It is monitored by a consortium who takes a look at the quality of the students and their admissions to colleges. And they're on par with the other high schools where students are able to take Regents exams. So doing away with the Regents exam is not such a end of the world type of decision. If it comes to that, I trust in the Board of Regents of the state. They are intelligent people, able to evaluate and listen to educators to get the best opinions on this. But I am not losing any sleep over them considering the idea.
Thank you. This question about, this is not just about the Regents test. This goes to the heart of whether we should have tests. How valid are tests? Now, if you ask me my personal opinion about tests, I mean, they're no perfect measure by any stretch. Every time you formulate a question, if one person formulates a question, there's a certain bias that's already introduced by the person who's formulating that question. Which is why all of these exams, whether they be Regents or SHSATs or SATs or other exams that are given throughout the country, they need to be screened very carefully, analyzed very carefully to make sure that there are no biases that are introduced. And to the extent that there could be biases, we have to address those factors. But can we get rid of exams altogether? In a perfect world, I think we would have every single student in every subject mentored and taught and evaluated for their learning on a very comprehensive basis. The problem with that is, number one, I don't know if we could ever have enough resources to do that. Number two, if you only rely on one evaluator or even a small number of evaluators, right there's also a lack of uniformity across the evaluations. So no system is going to be perfect. There's, I never studied politics. My major is in mathematical physics. There's something called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which I'm sure you all know about. It's whether the more you try to measure something, the more you alter the nature of it, what you're trying to measure. And I think student evaluations is not that different. You can choose one system or another, but no system is going to have perfect results. So at the end of the day, I don't see our society, or the world is getting more crowded, things are getting more technologically advanced, and at some point there do need to be a set of measures, evaluations that are unbiased and applied to everybody who's trying to get to a certain point. Our to try to make that process as free and void of biases as possible. But none of those systems will be perfect in its ability to measure the outcome or measure or evaluate student performance. So on the question of Regents, what's interesting to me is that if in fact more and more states are going away from test results, as are apparently some of the top schools, top universities in this country, going away from some of those test results, those are experiences that we should be studying for New York's system to see if any of that can apply here. There are other countries, many Asian countries, are societies that are built on testing, and more testing. I mean, my parents in Taiwan, every couple of years in their life, they had to take a test. They had to take a test to get to kindergarten, grade school, middle school, high school, college. What part of military service would they be in? If they applied for jobs, they had to take a test to figure out what kind of corporation they'd be working for. I mean, it was a never-ending test process in those lives. Now, that may work well in a relatively homogeneous society. We are by no means a homogeneous society, so we have many more factors that we have to consider. And therefore, I don't personally think that we're a society that's going to be so highly concentrated on testing and more testing. But can we eliminate all tests? That is a question that I don't know the answer to. My initial reaction is that we probably can't completely do away with all tests, including something like Regents test.
You know, even if I could, just number one, let us not forget that as much as the American system in general have been attacked by people, America still leads in innovation, okay, with the kids that come out of their high schools and colleges and go into the real world. And that's a tribute to our educational system in general, okay? And that's not to be forgotten. The other thing that just came to mind, it would be very interesting what the test is for a legislator, an elected official, how you rate an elected official, whether they're good or bad, okay? And that would differ from wherever you live, okay? I could go into Manhattan and the people in my district will say, I'm a flunky because I don't pass very many bills. But in Manhattan, the legislators in Manhattan, they're like pit bulls with their bills. I mean, they get passed. They pass dozens of them during the course of a year, okay? Even in the outer boroughs, maybe we don't pass that much. Does that make me a bad legislator? I don't know. It depends on what you consider is going to be your measurement from the outside. And that could vary, okay? And the way you test for that can vary too. I don't know if that makes any sense in this whole discussion, but I just throw it out.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I had more questions, but we got a ton of questions only about the SHSAT. So these are all great questions. I want to emphasize that, but I'm going to try to ask a simple one in the time we have left. Assemblyman Benedetto, you referred to this earlier. It's something I'm curious about as well. So why can't the state just give control of specialized high schools back to New York City? And this person also said, please provide a direct and clear answer. So is there a drumming also happening? I think Senator Liu and I talked about this before, that there's been chat always for many, many years about why not just repeal head Calandra.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, once you get the power, it's tough to give it out, okay? And there's a political answer to you. Why do you give it? To me, to my answer, given my brothers, I'd say repeal head Calandra and be done with it. Now it's a city problem, which maybe it should never have been a state problem, huh? Okay? But, gee, it's kind of nice to be wanted, isn't it? And people coming knocking on your doors and saying, help us out here, come up with a solution. And yes, it may be problematic, but boy, you got them, you know? So I think that's part of the political problem. How do you give up? It's the same thing with mayoral control of the schools. Well, maybe you don't want to legislate that. Maybe you want to make mayoral control permanent, and so they don't have to come back to Albany every 5 years. But there's something to be said about making them come back and be underneath your thumb. Political consideration. Okay, might not be the best one, but I think it's an honest one in some way. Where'd that question come from, by the way?
I mean, look, the admissions process for the specialized high schools is not the only thing. It's not the only part of New York City life that is directly governed by state law. There are a multitude of things, including what Chairman Benedetto said about mayoral control. That's, in 3 years, in 2.5 years, that has to come back to Albany for reauthorization or potential changes. And many legislators have the opinion that, well, we don't necessarily trust the city in what it's doing. And so we need to retain some measure of governance over what's happening in the schools. And it's not just New York City. There are parts of the Buffalo school system, Rochester, other school districts upstate or outside New York City that have specific things about or requirements, restrictions in state law that apply only to them. So it's not just New York City. And, maybe the Assembly member is right that perhaps New York City should be given control over what to do with these schools. But just because these are schools that are within New York City doesn't mean that people from way upstate New York don't care about what's happening in these schools. I've actually spoken with colleagues who have never lived in New York City, but they are concerned about these schools. They are New York schools after all. Not, New York City schools, but they are New York State schools as well. And so there is an awareness of what these schools are and what the process has been for the last 48 years. And, and to the extent that that process is going to be changed, well, state legislators are probably not going to, I'm just going to say this is just my opinion, obviously. I don't think control or the requirements for admissions to the specialized high schools in New York City is going to be taken out of state law. I think it's going to remain there in one form or another. It's just, what is that form going to take? That's the big question. And again, the high school, the admissions process for these 3 or currently 8 high schools is not the only thing that in state law that governs a specific school district. There are many other examples of this as well.
I'd just like to weigh in quickly.
Oh, yes, please. Sorry, go ahead.
So basically, I just want to say that Senator Liu and Assemblyman Benedetto have been talking about the specialized high school test as a political issue. And that makes sense, they're both politicians. But I don't have that luxury. They talked about that maybe we can just wait for this process, weigh over it for more years, see what happens. But there are students in these schools right now who aren't being educated. To me, the question to these schools isn't what's going to happen in 20 years, it's what's going to happen to me. Where I go to high school defines where I go to college and what job I'm going to have. And right now, I'm 16, I don't know what that's going to be. The specialized high school test right now defines what my little brother's going to do. He's spending his summer prepping for the specialized high school admissions test. So it's not a political issue for me, and we've had numerous studies going over it. We don't need another study, we don't need another committee. What we need is action from the city and from the state.
I would love to keep talking about this. There's so many things we could talk about, but that's the time for us. So thanks everyone for sticking around, and thank you to my great panelists.
Give a round to our moderator.